Exit algorithms. Scale smarter. Sell stronger.
Welcome to Exit Algorithms, the podcast where we decode what it really takes to unlock growth, streamline operations, and prepare your business for a high-value exit. I'm your host, Pete Vera, and today I'm joined by Tad Nelson. Tad founded the law offices of Tad Nelson and Associates in 1994. With over 35 years of experience and over 400 jury trials, he's a board-certified criminal law, holds a master's in Forensic Toxicology, and is one of the few Texas attorneys recognized as a forensic lawyer-scientist. Tad, excited to have you here today. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Pete. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I loved doing some research on your business you've built. It's very impressive. Do you mind sharing with the audience today a little bit about your journey and maybe some of the highs and lows and how you grew it to what it is today?
Well, originally when I got out of law school, I had come from an accounting background at UT. And I kind of thought I wanted to stick around there. And, what seemed interesting to me was estate planning. And so I ultimately started with a probate firm, a big probate firm in downtown Houston. And literally in 2 or 3 months, realized it wasn't for me. I needed the action. I couldn't just sit there at a desk, figuring out where do people stuff, what documents they need. Just wasn't for me. And I was in the process of getting a master's in tax law at University of Houston at the time. Did a couple more semesters of that just because I didn't want to quit. And then ultimately I finally did quit. But I went home, was talking to my wife, wasn't happy about the situation at the probate firm. And I called a friend of mine who was the elected DA in Galveston County, said, hey, you always said I could have a job. I said, I'm really not happy where I am, and he said, when can you start? So I literally the very next day walked in, resigned from my job in Houston and started as a DA in 2 weeks and did that for 3 years and then started my own shop and have been doing that since June 1st of 94, and the courtroom was kind of my thing. I mean, I'm kind of a talk to people, have to be out there negotiating, kind of personality, and it's just the place for me. So I've been there since 94.
Yeah, I read, you built your firm around big city experience, small town values. What do you mean by that? Could you elaborate on that? And how do you keep that personal feel while you grow your business?
Well, there's 2 things I always fall back on. And it's funny because I always, even in 94, realized that, I was taking people at their lowest. You have people that are either charged with crimes or going through a divorce. They may not get to see their child as much as they'd like. And, my job, I always kind of realized it was to, take them from this very dark place in their life and bring them to the light kind of thing. And, and then you started realizing there's actually a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. Now, granted, it's only been out 10 years, but we started it 30 years ago. And the whole point is, when somebody comes to me with a criminal problem, they start here and they ultimately want a goal of getting through it, getting out of it. But that's just half the story. The journey is the other half. So we kind of realized that we put as much emphasis on the journey as we did the result. Because if a person's at home losing their mind out on the ledge, they need somebody, they need reassurance. They need somebody that's going to be there for them. They need to know you have their back. And yeah, it might seem trivial, but it's not. And I promise you it's not. And I honestly think that's what makes my firm a little different because, we have a client success manager who literally does nothing more than send emails after a court date, making sure they understood what the court date was about and what happened and where we're going next. Because the reason the boogeyman to children was so frightful is because they didn't know who the boogeyman was, and if you can literally help people understand what they're going through, it's so much easier for them. And I think that's been our biggest thing is, you don't think the legal business or the criminal defense and family law as a service. You think of it, you're providing a legal service, but you don't realize that it is a service industry. It's no different than a restaurant where you sit somebody down, you make them feel comfortable. You literally, mesmerize them with all the things you can do for them.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And just building keeping customer service as front and center to
Yeah.
your business.
And absolutely, that's the easiest way to get more customers too. I mean, the better the experience, the more they're going to, tell other people. It's after 36 years, I would say 90% of the people that come to us say, "Oh yeah, I, I know you helped out Bob, or you helped out Bob's little brother, and man, they said, got to come talk to you." So ultimately, we've worked hard for over 30 years. And like I said, we have always stressed, the journey as much as the destination.
Yeah. What does, over 400 trials teach you about people, pressure, decision making?
Well, I'll tell you the one thing you would think, you think as a criminal defense lawyer, it's going to be tough, which it should be tough. And the government, they're on the white horse, they're wearing the white hat, and they get to pick the cases. But I will tell you this, as bad as turning on CNN or MSNBC or Fox, whichever one you watch, as much as that can let you down about humanity is still there. And juries want to do the right thing. And if you have the right case, they will listen and they will follow the law. And I don't know what percentage of, not guilty I have, but it's way more than I should have. And it's because, it's again, you're talking to a jury, you're explaining a situation, you're humanizing your client, you're humanizing the situation. And they realize that, not every time a person's charged with a crime, they did it. Matter of fact, the majority of the time, I would say, when we go to trial, obviously at that point, been doing it long enough to know that, hey, if I've got a bad case, I don't have an ego. So there's no reason to go to trial. Can't get anything there. But on the ones we do go to trial, we expect to have a pretty good chance. And, juries will follow the law, and juries don't have a bit of hesitation. I used to think they did when I was younger. I used to think a jury was afraid to let somebody charged with murder go, or let somebody go that, touched a child, or in theory was charged with touching a child. They're not. And I'll tell you the thing, the hardest cases I try are the child cases. I do a lot of, sexual assault and aggravated sexual assaults of children. And something came to me, 20 years or so, we get to talk to the jury in Texas. We have voir dire. We get to, talk, ask the jury questions. On a big case like that, we might get 2 hours each side. And I always start with, who here, realizes how bad, an aggravated sexual assault of a child is. And they're all like, yeah, kill him, whatever, he's horrible. And I said, I want you just to, think in your mind just for a second, as bad as it is to take the innocence of a child like that, and as horrible a crime that would be. Imagine if you didn't do it and you were here charged with it. How bad would that be? Because your life is over. You will never get past that stigma. You're now losing jobs and what have you. And you'll see the heads start to nod, and then they immediately, it's like, the guy from the old Motel 6, and here's the other side of the story. Once that light goes off, they really start to understand,
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. I'd love to talk a bit about also the business side. We talked a bit on the pre-show. You have multiple offices, multiple locations. What does it take to run a multi-office law firm well?
Same concept. Everything takes good people. And I think that's the hardest part of running a law office, is finding good people, because, not only do they have to be smart, they have to be personable, and they have to, be ready and willing to work. And that's been the hardest thing. But I'm fortunate, very fortunate, knock on wood. We have really good people at the two offices. We're trying to expand into a third one, a little bit more into the north side of the lake as I get closer to Houston. I'm in a little place called League City. So I'm at the top of Galveston County, and, we practice in Harris County. We're trying to do a little more family law up in Harris County. So we're about to get a third office up there and bring in about, 2 or 3 more lawyers and 3 or 4 more support staff. So, the hardest thing is, getting the staff, but it's a lot easier when they come to a culture, when they're not running around, like a chicken with their head cut off. When they come in and the culture is told day one, when they see the culture around them, it's a lot easier for them to get on board. You know what I mean? If the train is going one direction, it's a lot easier to grab it.
Yeah. How did you go about developing that culture?
Well, I don't want to pat myself on the back, but you kind of lead by example. I hand, the day you start working for us, I hand a couple books out that are important, basically, on service and what have you. And, I said, hey, you got to have these read in 90 days. You're going to get $100 for each one extra, but you got to have them read in 90 days. They're a gift to you. But, and I think when they read it, they start understanding, and even they don't understand every concept. They understand that's what I'm trying to accomplish. And then during that 90 days, they're seeing other people implement it. And it's, that going that little bit extra for the customer, for the client, that kind of makes it it makes the culture at the office all about satisfying the client. Now, don't get me wrong. We have clients that are just off their rocker, that want unreasonable stuff. And that's a second, problem. You got to handle them just as kindly, but just because they want something doesn't mean they get it, because some stuff they want is not reasonable. We get divorced clients that come in here and they basically say, I don't want him to ever see the kids. Well, that's not going to happen, So we've got to kind of, bridge that gap as well, but that could be a little tougher actually.
Yeah, I imagine. Yeah. What do you think is the biggest mistake most attorneys make when they're trying to grow beyond a solo practice?
That's a great question. I don't really think there can ever be a mistake when you're bringing on more people. What scares me for some people is, every time we've grown, we've gotten to that, where you grow and you're about to bust. It's just so much work. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but it is a decent financial thing in the sense of you don't bring on the extra expenses until the work is there. I think some people might go a little bit fast getting that, and that, maybe puts them in, but it also helps them do a better product. I think with what I see with lawyers is more times than not, it's just no desire to grow. I think that's the crazier thing. I think I've seen so many lawyers that get to what they think is a comfortable living and don't grow at anything. You can walk in and that's the one thing you've never seen at my office. You can walk in these offices and it's the exact same as it was 10 years ago, maybe even the same computers, That's the one thing about my office. We've always been changing furniture, computers. I mean, we're always going to have the best of everything. The technology changes on the phones. We're going to get rid of those and get better ones. We're going into a phone system now where every phone call will be, transcribed, will be put into their file, and then we will receive, with AI, you can do so much. So as information comes in on every client, it's just going to go into their Teams folder. Then AI is going to look at that and tell me if that puts me in a different situation, if there's new items that I need to look into or new items that are going to be problematic. So if every bit of information that comes into your office on a client is evaluated relative to all the other information on that client, you're always at ground zero. And there's no reason not to be right now. You know what I'm saying? 10 years ago, 5 years, 3 years, 2 years ago, I would have to go back through a file every time I grabbed a file and kind of get a feel for it and see where it was. Or now, well, not right now, but once our systems are in place that we're working on, we'll be able to just to read the last folder that says, okay, here's where we are. Here's what needs to be done. Here's why we might lose. Here are the 3 things if we can prove we're going to win. It's that simple. And that can all be done for you. That's where the lawyering is going to get better. And the service now, if the actual lawyering, if you can get that down to what used to be 3 hours into 15 seconds, now you've got all that extra time just to make the client feel good, So it's working out. I mean, don't get me wrong. I see a lot of the problems with AI, but if right now we're in that sweet spot before it gets, too crazy. And if you're not using it, you're getting left behind.
Right. Yeah. So staying ahead of the technology is a big piece to growing.
I think it is. I think it's the biggest piece right now. I mean, because the one thing it can do, you can grow without bringing in more people, if you understand it. And then you can bring the people in when you really need it, once you expand either by location, or if you bring in more lawyers. Obviously, every lawyer is going to need a paralegal or a secretary babysitter. So you're going to have to bring in people there. But to get to that spot, you're accomplishing more work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. How else are you leveraging AI these days, personally or with your business? And, how do you see it affecting your industry the most?
Well, I think the one thing, the Westlaw and the Lexis, the different legal programs we have that do our legal research, still not perfect because there's little AI gaps in it. And they'll tell you, they'll have like Westlaw, for example, it has an AI deep dive where it'll really go look at your stuff, but it'll tell you better run this through, the other side of Westlaw to make sure the sites are right because they're still going to hallucinate again. And, so obviously you got to be very careful using Chat or Claude for, for legal research. But the ideas that show up really come up good. They have some great ideas. I use it I probably use Chat and Claude, you know, 4 or 5 times in the morning before I even drive out from my house. I mean, I shoot at it and say, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing a whole series of video social on this. What do you think?" And then they'll give you other ideas. Say, "Hey, I'm going to write some blogs." Claude can go out and tell you which blogs are getting hit and which ones are important. Go write ones about this, Mr. Nelson. Well, it's so funny how Claude and Chat work. Hey, that's a great idea, Tad. The way it always starts off by telling you, and then it directs you to go do it. So, but yeah, there's so many ways. So it helps me with my advertising, and then, at 61, I do travel a little bit, so I might be out of the country 8 weeks a year. And if I didn't film enough before I left, or something big comes out, I have an editor in the Philippines full time, and he can go and just use AI and create it. So as long as we sign off, me and him sign off on on the uh, the script, we can use AI that way. So we're using it across the board. You know, I've also used it to write all my protocols and procedures. We changed those all up. Now, everything from, which way to put the toilet paper on to how to get the mail, there's a procedure and a protocol. So if somebody goes away, the next person can just go read it.
Hmm.
Everything is standardized. Everything, everybody. And that's another big thing with growing a business. If you're growing a business, everybody better know their duties, you know, and what's the best way to make sure they know it? Put it in writing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So a thought partner is a good use case, bounce ideas off with AI
Mm-hmm.
as well. It sounds like it's basically a force multiplier for you and your business.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And, it can help me, like, especially when somebody calls in and says, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking I need to do." And I can put a perspectives together to kind of show them because I've been doing it long enough with Chat and Claude that, it starts to pick up on my procedures, and the way I do things. And I can say, okay, this guy, here's what he wants. Here's what he think. I want to send him a letter explaining the process, how long it's going to last, where probably the investment's going to have to go, how much time, how much money. And, I can get back a first draft and work that up, in about 30 minutes where it would have might taken me 3 hours. And I can send him back something that really he has in his hand and he can read it and say, okay, that makes sense. I'm willing to pay good money to do that. And that's the other thing we've done with, with everything being recorded and transcribed and really understanding their goals. You can send them a document. Like I send everybody, especially in my family law practice, not so much criminal law because different things come at you. But, we have a game plan, literally call it a game plan. And that's a document that we filled out at the beginning and it's what they want. Now, it's their case. They can change it anytime they want, but they got to understand that I'm working off of that. And that was from our conversations, which are transcribed and saved, and any other emails or anything they've ever sent, because those go in there, they go into there and they say, "Hey, Tad, I don't want the Corvette anymore. he screwed it up. I wanted to take it from him, just because I knew how much he liked it or something like that. That goes in there, and now we're not trying to get the Corvette. So then at mediation, and she says, hey, I wanted his Corvette. And say, no, that's not what you want. I got it right here on this date. You called and told us you'd given up on that, or you decided that, he did something nice to you or something, whatever. But that's the stuff AI has done and made it so easy to be a better lawyer. And that's what's beautiful about AI. You can be a better lawyer. And so a lot of people think AI can replace you. It can't yet. Maybe it will. But what it's doing right now, it makes you a better lawyer if you know how to use the tools.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's a lot of predictions out there about which industries are going to be affected most, disrupted most. I read, accountants and lawyers. Some people are predicting that there will be, eliminated or at least reduced. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I can see them being reduced. Absolutely. And, I even thought criminal law would be one of the hardest ones. But if you literally, if both sides type up what they think happened and feed it into something that has, every result ever done, I mean, I don't see why you'd need a lawyer. I mean, I can see in my head how everybody could be replaced. It could, it could be like the British barrister system where you have the lawyer that might be the computer and the barrister who just hands it to the court. Who the heck knows? But it could definitely, yeah. There's nothing we do that, well, I will tell you this. There's not one thing that's done in my office by somebody that can't be done better by AI.
That's scary for some people, but I think it goes back to what you said is start using it now and get ahead of it. At least you won't be one of those unfortunate firms that falls behind, right?
Right. And especially, when you look at SEO and everything, this is literally like the beginning of SEO was again. So now there's a whole nother push to get at the front of, the AI advertising, and you better be getting on it. You better be doing whatever you can to stay out there. And, for example, my blogs, I use a program called Surfer, and it helps me write these blogs. So I write one up however I get it, and then I put it into Surfer. And Surfer, we kind of go through it and see where we can enhance and watch it score. Well, 4 months ago, I just got an SEO score. Starting 2 months ago, I get an SEO score and an AI score. So how you're doing. So you really, if your blog doesn't rate high enough on Surfer, you don't even waste putting it on there. Because at the end of the day, none of the stuff we're doing on our websites is, touchy-feely, inspirational in the sense of just to tell somebody a story. We're all doing it on the back channel to get benefit from it. I mean, don't lie to yourself. Yeah, if it can educate you or inform you at the same time, it gets me SEO juice or AI juice, more power to it, right? But at the end of the day, don't fool yourself. People are putting blogs on those to give them, readability, to give them readership, to give them numbers. No doubt about it. Because it's a business.
Yeah. Well said.
And that's the problem with lawyers, Pete, is that, and I kind of went to a seminar about 3 years ago. And, I got to tell you, I was one of the, I kind of inherently, from coming from business school at UT, kind of wanted to grow my business and always saw it like as a 5-lawyer thing. And then I went to this seminar, about 3 years ago, and saw a lot of things I wasn't doing and immediately picked up on them. And for example, probably had some blind spots in intake. Well, if you got a 26%, blind spot in intake and you're a $2 million firm, well, you just brought in $500,000, if you can fix that blind spot. So that's what those kind of things. And then some of the other things, and they finally got us back into more. So there was a couple quick things that these guys, these business coaches kind of pointed us in the right direction. And then how business works. Once there's momentum to grow, I mean, once you stop growing, you're dying, if it's growing, you can't stop it, and if you do, it fades like dead fruit on a vine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's either growing or dying. If it's staying the same, it's dying because of inflation, right?
Yeah. And relative to the others just running by you. So if you're stagnant, those 5 firms that were right under you that wouldn't get that case. Well, if you're staying put and they're not, there's those 5 firms are now getting that case. So, I mean, it's really bizarre because, like I said, so many lawyers don't understand business. They just get comfortable, sending their shirts out and going out to dinner twice a month, that kind of thing. But maybe being a member of the country club. But the reality of it is, I mean, and then once you do realize the growth, sky's the limit. You really can just keep it's pieces that you plug in, Hey, if you want more people to call your office, well, you better put more into, advertising. It's that simple,
Yeah. Well, Tad, a lot of great insights today. I got one final question for you. If you could pick one practical tip for business owners wanting to build a respectable business like you have over the long term, what would it be?
Treat every client the same. People, especially in any business, it's like a restaurant, a McDonald's or the finest steakhouse. If everybody's treated with kindness, respect, dignity, and they know you're doing good, hard work for them, that is the number one thing to run a business is how you treat the people. I mean, it is an honor for somebody to come to your office and give you money to do work for them. So many people think, I'm doing you a favor. No. Anybody that walks in your office, I get them that come off the street. I had a kid yesterday. It was hysterical. He wanted to, he wanted to talk about getting some stuff off his record. And he literally was on the mowing team across the street at another place. So this 25-year-old kid, he had some problems when he was 18, comes in my office, sweaty like there's no tomorrow. And, dripping sweat. I brought him in the office. He's, sweat everywhere. But the number one thing he wanted to know was how I could, if there was any way to fix his, he told me about his case. I couldn't fix it. But I explained to him the process. I explained to him, I went and got the statute for him, showed it to him. I treated him with dignity and respect. And when he left, he walked out and came back and he said, Mr. Nelson, thank you. I'm going to go write you a review. Just because we gave him respect. That's all people want in this world. That's really what they want. They want you to know that somebody is listening to them.
Yeah. Well said. Awesome, Tad. I really appreciate you coming on today. A lot of good insights. If listeners enjoy this conversation as much as I have, where's the best place they can find you and learn more about you and your business, the articles you write?
Well, our website is an easy one. It's tadlaw.com. And we are basically all over social media. Tad.in on TikTok, Tad_Nelson. Tad.Nelson on TikTok, Tad_Nelson on Instagram. So, we post little things every day on, Instagram and Facebook. Yeah, please come follow us. Yeah, we're out there posting. It's kind of fun. We do a lot of legal informative stuff, but we've it's so much fun with the world out there. We've kind of gotten into some political stuff too. That's fun. There's just too much going on not to jab at that.
Awesome. I'll leave that in the show notes. Thanks for coming on today, Tad. A great conversation.
Thanks, Pete. You're great. Have a great day.
Exit algorithms. Scale smarter. Sell stronger.